Hello, welcome to History Chats. We're talking about the Pavilion today. Um, which pavilion? We'll find out. Um, well, obviously, this is the Rothschild Pavilion. Maybe not an angle that you're used to seeing it. And I initially was thinking about, so this month, if you've been watching this month and paying attention, you might notice we've been talking a lot about historic preservation. May is Historic Preservation Month, and so we try to hit those topics. And when I was looking at like, okay, what historic preservation topics in the county do we have a lot of stuff on that we've not talked about? And I thought, the restoration of the pavilion in the early 2000s would be a good topic, right? Because it's a historic building, it's a great building, and it is one of those stories of success where, hey, this building, which, there's some thoughts about whether or not it should be torn down or replaced or what have you. The community came together and said, no, this is important, and it is still around. It's been restored, and it's a great. If you've not been to the Rothschild Pavilion, highly recommend it. It's a great building, very impressive, and great to see inside that it's been restored. So, and outside, right? It's still around. So I started looking through all of the stuff that we have, of which we have a lot. Um, we've got registration forms for the National Register of Historic Places and brochures and business development series, marketing research projects, and all sorts of stuff, right? And I realized I don't really have the time to really put into this right now to do it justice. And I want to do it justice. So I decided to postpone this. We're still talking about the pavilion. Yeah, well, the pavilion. But I'm also recognizing that by this point that another sort of option has emerged, and this one is interesting because I asked myself, okay, why is it a pavilion? Like a pavilion, right? That's a word for something like this. It makes sense. But what is a pavilion, and does this fit in? Because I was like, I just want to kind of make sure that I start there, right? Like they called it the pavilion. What is the pavilion? And it turns out that's a little bit more complicated than you might think, certainly than I was expecting. So let's follow that line a little bit. These, according to Wikipedia, which of course, yeah, Wikipedia is usually a good place to start. Not always a great place to end your research, but is it usually a good place to get a general understanding of the topic. And they've got a great article about what is a pavilion from an architectural perspective, right? And they've got all these pictures of different examples and descriptions and all of that. And so here are 9 of them. And none of them look quite like the Rothschild Pavilion, the one that we have in our area, right? Why is that? Well, there's a couple things here, and I'm just going to sum it up. I'm not an expert on the etymology of the word, so I'm going to be borrowing from other sources, like Wikipedia, for example. But basically, the idea is the word pavilion derives from Old French pavilion. I don't know if it's pronounced the same way. Something along that lines. It also has sort of similar branches out of Latin, which basically means, well, they derive from the same root word or words, which come to mean butterfly and tent. Kind of a specific, like big tent. Basically, the idea for tent is it's like a butterfly wing, like the wings kind of wrapped around. I think that's kind of how it goes. Yeah, that's kind of where we start from. And you can kind of see a little bit of that, like tent kind of makes sense for some of these. You look at like the round structures, sometimes like more like a gazebo, like the top middle there. But the top left and the center one, those are considered to be pavilions in a variety of senses. And one of them is kind of the structure, right? They're these round structures, kind of like a tent. Maybe not like traditional or the stereotypical like, triangle tent, but more of like the older forms of tents. But obviously, that doesn't hold universally because a lot of these other examples don't really look like they're from tents, right? Here's another example. This is the Holcombe Hall. I'm probably butchering some English here, some British words here too. This is the town of Holcombe in Norfolk, England. It's an 18th century country house. Kind of looks like a palace, but country house, nice country house, right? Now the center bit there with like the columns, that's the house, the country house, sorry. But the other bits, those are considered to be pavilions. Because pavilion, another way to look at this, so like here you can see this is like an down view look at it. This is one way to describe these side structures as being pavilions. They're sort of outlying structures that are connected or relying or connected to, in this case, literally with structure, but they could be just a roof or something like that. They don't even have to be connected. They could just be associated to, nearby, a main structure. So that is another way, again, architecturally speaking, but that's, neither of these really fit the way that Americans are using the term by the turn of the century, 19th century. So what does that look like? Well, let's look at this. So this is at the online etymology dictionary. Don't mind the blurred. The certain pet store that is advertising to me at this case did not pay us to advertise to you. So actually, let's just get away from that. Stripping away the etymology, the linguistic background, the dates, and all of that, there's basically three big definitions that they lay out. A pavilion can be a large, stately tent raised on posts and used as a movable habitation. And these are all kind of like historical, as not necessarily used currently. That's one explanation of it. That's one definition. Another might be a small or moderate-sized building, isolated but dependent on a larger or principal building. It's like a hospital. Or like the country house that we just saw, right? They're side buildings. They're small or moderate compared to the main one. They're isolated, separate, but connected to. Actually, just as an aside, there's actually another good example locally here. Did you know that there's another pavilion that is on the National Register of Historic Places? It is over a century old, and it is something that almost certainly you would have walked past, many of you, if you've been to this area. So in Marathon Park, so Marathon Park was the fairgrounds. When the Fair Agricultural Society gave the fairgrounds to the county to become the first county park in 1921, part of the stipulation was, yes, let us have the fair a week there every year, and also replace some of our buildings. So like we need a new grandstand and we really need new judging barn and pavilion. Pavilion. So if you go past, and I don't know if you've ever been here, past the youth building over here, past the exhibition building, the iconic exhibition building, there is back here, barn, judging barns for the use of the fair. And this centerpiece here is the judging pavilion. And I don't know how many people call it that these days, but this is in fact officially, from an architectural perspective, they knew what they were doing. Alexander Eschweiler designed this. Gary talked about him a couple weeks ago. This is an exhibition. No, sorry, this is a judging pavilion, and it fits that category, right? It's kind of round. It's not quite circular, spherical, but close. And it serves a purpose connected to. It's the place where the barns are where the animals are kept during the fair. They are judged here, so it's connected to. And literally, it is connected. This is a roof that connects the two places. So there you go. There's another judging pavilion, the pavilion that you can go to see if you've never been through it, and if you get a chance to get inside, it's kind of cool to see. Anyway, maybe most relevant to us though is the third thing here: open building in a park, etc., used for shelter and entertainment. This is closer, right? Let's talk about the Fairgrounds Pavilion. So I was looking at when I got stuck down this route earlier about a week ago. I started to look at like, okay, let's look at like newspaper articles. What are they using the term pavilion? Before the fairgrounds becomes the park, and they build the judging pavilion before, even before the Rothschild Pavilion. Um, and what I found was interesting is they often talked about the pavilion at the fairgrounds. Like this is before the judging barn, right? And they're talking about it. This is a place where when they have a convention or a get together or whatever, like for example, Presbyterian Day here in 1908, they might make use of the pavilion as a place for concessions or for food, kind of a central place for the people getting together under the pines at Marathon Park. Sorry, the fairgrounds at this point. Now, I've seen this picture. This is not the pavilion. Although I guess you could call it this, but I don't think this is what they're talking about. This would be sort of like an early band shell sort of situation, but a shelter, you can use it in different contexts. But I was going back and looking at it, and I realized, oh, there's buildings behind them that I had never seen before. And these don't seem to be the permanent structures that I'm used to seeing in pictures of the fair from this year, or fairgrounds from this rough era, right? Um, which is surprising. I think another aspect of the pavilion in this context is this is not a permanent structure. I don't want to say it's temporary because I don't think that's necessarily the case. It's not a tent being pitched. This is a structure that's being built, but they're not putting a foundation down. They are not, putting down brick and mortar to build the wall. This is just let's put some wood, let's get it up so that people can use it. And I think that's another context that's important in this case too, right? A pavilion used in this experience is an open air structure that is used for entertainment, for people gathering, and it is often not necessarily intended to be like a traditional building, which is closer to what this is, right? But I'm going to argue that the reason that we call this as a pavilion is not because it fits any of the definitions that we've talked about before. Not really, right? It's because this isn't the first building to be called the Pavilion on the grounds of the Rothschild Pavilion. Yeah, there was another one. We'll talk about why the second one, or the current one, was needed, but this is the first one. It was built in 1908 by the Wisconsin, no, sorry, they weren't the Wisconsin Valley Electric Company at this point. They were let me get the words correct, the Wausau Electric Railroad Company. This was the trolleys, the streetcars. Around 1906, they got started to take people around Wausau. By 1908, they have extended down to the Schofield, down Grand Avenue, towards Schofield. And partially because the people who owned the streetcar company, who they then purchased the electric company that provided them electricity to kind of work together. That's relevant in a second here. They wanted to get down to the Rothschild area because they knew they were building a paper mill down there by the end of the decade. And so wouldn't it be great to both serve those communities that are going to emerge down in Schofield and Rothschild, which are going to grow quite considerably because of this? They might not necessarily have all of the services that you would want if to move there. So to make it a little bit more attractive, hey, you're just a trolley away from the downtown shopping department stores or what have you, right? And then also maybe to get people from Wausau down to work. But also, we want people taking the trolley all the time. And so, particularly like on weekends and holidays, in which there would not be necessarily a lot of travel, then it's probably part of the reason they built this. So they built a park. They built a park first. So it's a nice green space. There's lots of natural trees, and there wasn't quite the lake that it is now. As you can see from this picture, underneath the word pavilion here, there's that white bit. That is a path. And then there's grass. There is a bit of a lake, but it's way further down there. Um, that's going to change by like 1909, 1910, as the damming of the river for the Rothschild paper mill is going to lead to Lake Wassa growing quite considerably. But that is not quite there yet. So the green space, it's a great place for people to get together. They have connections to sweeten the deal. They build a pavilion to make that experience of entertaining at the park a little bit more exciting. And that's where the pavilion comes in. Now, technically speaking, it's not called the Rothschilds Pavilion yet, because it's not the Rothschild Park yet. It is Pine Park, which is the name that they chose in 1908 initially. Now, by 1909, they start to move away from that, but it's kind of interesting. So this is an article talking about that from 1908. Basically, they consulted a bunch of people, civic improvement officers, members of the Ladies Literary Club, and the Wassa Park Board. No county board, but Wassa did have a park department at this point. And they decided to choose Pine Park because, quote, the new park is almost entirely covered with pines, and the exhilarating aroma of the pine trees in all parts of the park, one of nature's contribution to the attractiveness of the place, struck the officers of the Street Railroad Company as a sufficient reason for naming the place Pine Park. So there you go. This is met with some skepticism from the public. For one, we had kind of recently started calling the cemetery on Grand Avenue Pine Grove. It's just everything south of Wassa Pine now. Also, are people going to know what that means? Pine? Like, are most people going to assume that's just like the stuff you build with, like a board? Will they associate with the trees? Which is kind of silly to say now, I think, but at the time that was one of the criticisms. I think probably the most accurate and kind of hard hitting, maybe the more reasonable criticism is probably driven hard home most intentionally by a guy who wrote a letter to the editor under the name Pen Pusher. Let me read a bit of this poem that he submits. It's called Pine Park Pavilion Poem. Pine Park perplexes people. Pine Park Pavilion, too. Perhaps prim picnic parties prefer a park skidoo. Park Rothschilds, past to present, pure, pleasant, and polite, is put by peevish persons to non-poetic flight. I think you get the idea. It feels a little much with the alliteration. PPP, Pine Park Pavilion. They're going to hold on to it for a little while, but before too long, they're going to get, they're by like 1910, you'll see advertisements stop calling it the Pine Park Pavilion, and then it'll start to be the Park Pavilion in Rothschild, and then we'll just start calling it the Rothschild Pavilion. But the pavilion is the consistent thing throughout all of this, which I think is interesting. So there it is. Whatever they're calling it, it opens up in 1908. There's the trolley next to it, which would have taken people to and from it for events. This gives you kind of a close look. This is actually one of the more interesting postcards because you can kind of see the material. I don't know if it's coming across in the video here. Let's see if I can, oh, nope, wrong button. No, it did, there we go. A little clearer. This is pretty rough-hewn wood. That's the aesthetic they're going for, which I think is interesting. This is the interior to drive that home. The cafe. So you can see the furniture feels very rustic and intentionally so. They've got bits of pine branches just kind of sticking around for ambiance. You know, they're going out of their way to kind of make this very clear that this is pine trees. They're also very helpful in that there's a lot of pine trees in the vicinity to build with. But like even the posts, like the columns, they're not hewing the bark off. They're leaving that stuff on, just to kind of drive home what they're going for. So there you go. This is the cafe. This is looking the other direction. A little different picture here, but you can kind of get the idea. This is looking towards the dance hall, and again, you can kind of see yeah, they didn't really go out of their way to debark the logs before building with them, but that was the aesthetic they were going for. Canvas roof. I don't know if that's always there, if that disappears. There is some seating here on the left side, partially obscured by these columns, and the stovepipe here is the stage. There would have been a stage there for entertaining, and then dancers on the floor. Here is another one. This one, also note, this is the electric company, right? That is now is owned by the streetcar company that goes kind of wishy-washy, but basically the same entity. So their pavilion is going to have electricity, which is another attraction here. So they've got electric lights to keep the night alive, and lit into the night, doing some dancing at the ballroom, or sorry, the ballroom. And this is all dressed up for the UCT, Universal Commercial Travelers Convention. That's a traveling salesman, basically. Speaking of a dance, this is the account of the very first sort of public dance in that first Saturday. I'll just read a little bit of this. This is 1908, right? The first Saturday evening dance given at Pine Park Pavilion, still going with that, was given Saturday, and it was thoroughly a success. About 200 couples went down on the electric cars, and Cohn's 4th Regiment Orchestra furnished a musical inspiration that kept the dances merry till 11:30 o'clock. The closing time. Yeah, a concert of excellent music was given just before the dance started, and the gathering crowd, they wrote crown. There's a lot of typos in this. Bear with me here. They enjoyed it very much. The pavilion floor was in better shape than it had been at any time to date, and may it be said, about the best in this section. So, best that you could find in the region. The merrymakers were conveyed to Wausau on the power cars, all 5 of which were taken to the park at once and left at 11:30 o'clock, taking back all who had gone down. There seems to be an impression that the dances at the park Saturday nights extend past midnight, but this is not the fact. The waltz or the two-step being played at 11:30 o'clock is the sign night is over. Got cut off there, but yeah, when you hear the waltz or the two-step, that's it. Time to go home. And yeah, then it talks about how, the day before, Cohn had his 4th Regiment band had played a little bit of spiritual music, and that was a pretty good crowd. And then it talks about the electric cars and how smooth of a ride and quiet of a ride it took people down, except for the whistle, which attracted considerable attention yesterday. Also, roller skating. Here's a fun fact. Many of you, maybe if you're of a certain age, will remember roller skating at the Rothschild Pavilion. That is not a later development. They were doing that by 1910. And so here, for example, this is like 1909, 1910. This is the old original pavilion dance floor, and they're roller skating on it. So there you go. There's some long history of that. A lot of uses for a lot of different stuff here. And you might be saying, well, that's all good, but didn't you say that this doesn't get us any closer to a pavilion? If we're looking at the definition of what a pavilion is this a pavilion? Well, yeah, I would argue so. Remember the bit about being open air? Obviously there's walls there, or are there? So it is obviously okay, a couple things. I'm getting ahead of myself. The pavilion is centered around a park. We forget that today because the park itself, there's not a lot of park anymore. But they're used to, and it's not the only park in the town anymore, in the region. But it was really exciting to go down and to kind of leverage this. We've talked about this in the past, but they built a roller coaster, a wooden roller coaster for a while. They had a petting zoo of animals, uh, white-tailed deer. Um, on the water, once Lake Wassa gets up there, they had a swimming hole, and they had water slides and all sorts of stuff to get people here. Like, the park was the attraction. The pavilion was part of the larger park. And also, I think it was closer to like a tent, like this sort of thing that you can see, than you might think. So if we look at, like, this is a side view. I think this is looking north, so towards Wassa. Um, oh shoot! You know what? I think I put this in the wrong order. Hold on. There we go. That's the one I wanted to see. Um, so this is the cannon pointed towards the lake, right? So we have this really long porch. You can kind of see from the angle here where the steepled part, the gabled part of the roof meets the sort of less the more horizontal roof. That's kind of where the walls are, and then there's this porch that wraps around the entire thing, which is not something that you necessarily. Oop, that's the wrong thing. It's not something you see very often in the pictures of the pavilion. But once you look at it, you're like, yeah, there is a pretty significant porch. Also, just kind of interesting. You can see it better in this one, which I showed inadvertently for there for a second. You can see that there's canvas again that is like can be pulled down, unrolled and pulled down. I'm presuming to give some protection from the sun or wind or shade or whatever. I also kind of wonder to what extent the inside of, like, the walls, like, well, I mean, look at the walls, right? This is the dance floor. You see how the walls are these, like, strips of white, and then there's the posts. I think that white is those are canvas strips, so oiled canvas. Um, I'm not entirely sure whether these are a permanent situation. Like, obviously, there's major parts that can't be pulled out, but I think you probably could roll those up or maybe push them out. I don't know that for sure, but it wouldn't surprise me if that was the case. In which case, this is much more of a pavilion in more of the traditional sort of American colloquial sense. Um, but even if it isn't, even if these walls are permanent, they're not permanent, right? Because they're canvas. They're not substantial. The experience here is to be part of a larger experience. It's not just to be dancing inside the pavilion. And I think in that sense, it does tick the box of that definition of a pavilion in a big way, even if it's electrified, even if it's got walls around it. Hold on. I had to revert to an older save of the PowerPoint for a little bit here. So things didn't go in the order. That's right. So here's the thing, though. Maybe you caught it already. This is not long for the world. Like I said, it wasn't built as a permanent thing. I think they expected it to stick around a little longer than it did. But yeah, in okay, yeah, sorry. I've got my things mixed up again. Dang it. I'm not recording this again, so we'll just go with it. There we go. Yeah, so you can see here the chimney was the only thing that was left. It caught fire. It burned down. It's not terribly surprising in retrospect, right? This is a electrified building in 1911, and it burns down in April of 1911. It's electrified. It is a building made out of logs, oiled canvas, and like held together with pitch and rope. It's got lots of tree branches just creating kindling. As I understand it, what ended up happening was there was a stove left on or electrical short, and the whole thing went up. And like this is the article in the Wassa Pilot laying out the whole thing. I think I'm not going to read much of it. The main thing to say, though, is that it, when the fire was discovered, it was, I'll just actually read this sentence here. When the fire was discovered, it was plainly evident that there was absolutely no hope of saving the building, even if firefighting apparatus had been at hand. The Wassa firemen were not even summoned. Yeah, it happened, I believe, at night, or in the early days, hours of the morning. Something happened, it caught fire, and before anybody knew, it was gone. Um, and that was that. But then by the end of the year, the streetcar company recognized, like, yeah, the electric streetcar company, um, this worked really well. People really liked it, and maybe we can even bigger. Let's build bigger. So they do, and this is the resulting Rothschild Pavilion, which is, again, by this point, we're not calling it the Pine Park Pavilion, um, but it is just the new pavilion at Rothschild's. And before long, it'll just become colloquial known as Rothschild Pavilion. And this is essentially the pavilion we know today. Obviously, it's gone through some changes. It's over a century old at this point, 113 years, 112, somewhere in there. Um, so it's, and of course, over the years, it's been, especially recently in the last 21st century, 21st century, um, gone through some renovations and modernizations, and but it's still there, and it's still the same thing. Main thing here, though, is, of course, this is still called a pavilion, right? Still very popular, still serving in some ways. Like, it's not the same open structure as it was. It's not the same not permanent structure in the same way that the other ones were. The other one was. But it is still very much part of a larger park at this point in time. So they keep the name Pavilion, and it's going to continue to have the name Pavilion as people just get used to saying it. And that is kind of how we have it today. Just for comparison's sake, if we look at this picture compared to the old versus the new, you can see that not only did they rebuild and built a little bit more permanently, they built bigger. So gone is the wraparound porch, and now we have a much larger dance floor. Yeah, higher ceiling, allow for a little bit more air circulation maybe, and mezzanine on the northern side. But yeah, I mean, the basics are still there. Still, the trolley goes through. It still becomes home to the activities at the park. Now, at this point, this would be a good jumping off point to talk about the history of the Rothschild Pavilion that we know it's still there, but we'll have to do that another time, because that is essentially the story of the pavilion that I was setting out to talk to you today about. So there you go. That is the story of the pavilion. And now you know. Next time, if you ever get a chance, or you're driving past, or it comes up, you'll know. Actually, that's the second pavilion, and this is why it's called that. So, thanks for watching. I think that's the end of the program that I have. I think, like I haven't recorded this a few times. Full disclosure, I did this live. This is not a live stream. This is recorded. I did it live, and then basically all the technology was just not working. The microphone wasn't plugged in. I had to grab Gary's mic from the other side and swing it over. The internet decided to kind of cut out for a bit. So I think Facebook's the live stream on Facebook just stopped altogether. It was a pain. And I decided to just, all right, we're just going to delete that. I'm going to re-record it all the way through, and realized that while I was trying to troubleshoot the microphone, I had bumped the gain on this microphone all the way up. And so the audio that I was, I had adjusted for it, but it just sounded horrible. So this is actually the third time recording this. I'm pretty sure everything should be fine. If you're watching this, that means that it worked. So Yeah, sometimes stuff still goes wrong. What are you going to do? Um, but I thought it was a fun program and wanted to do it anyway. So worth the effort. With that in mind, yeah, be at next. Yeah, we'll be back next week. You can tell that I've recorded this 3 times, done this a few times. We'll be back next week with another History Chats. New month, new, you know, future programs. We'll tell you about it then. And yeah, in the meantime, thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time for some more History Chats. Have a wonderful rest of your day.